people have been isolated for most of this year.
Yeah.
So, but I had 2 acquaintances die yesterday. So we can hope that in the United States in about 4 months, this is like climate in the United States. It's very much the same. Climate change and COVID, it is the same people denying it. It's the same people refusing to support action. It is the same people. So in the United States, we have roughly 30 to 40% who deny the existence of COVID, who will not wear masks, who will purposefully come up to you directly and speak to you without a mask, who get together for Thanksgiving and otherwise. So we're going into a different subject. So it overlaps.
All right. Let's hope the next administration will be better, or different at least.
I try not to put people on pedestals, but there is no question this will be a better administration.
Yeah.
These will be competent, ethical, experienced people. May not agree with them always, but I have many of the American expression is to step on a soapbox. I have many soapboxes. If you go back to the Obama-Biden administration, I know quite a people who were in senior government positions. I do not know a single person who was not ethical, who was not hardworking, who was not, they were all hardworking, ethical, experienced, decent people who wanted to do good. Their definition of good might not have been my definition of good, but I never question any that I dealt with as to whether or not they thought their job was to serve the public interest. Working with the Trump administration, there are a few people, well, there are many I know, there are very few that I would say the same thing about. There are maybe 3 that I know personally who I would say were seriously ethical people trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Mostly ideologues and crooks.
Yeah. And what about the vice president?
Are we talking the current vice president or the coming vice president?
The coming one.
So what would be your question about Kamala Harris?
No, because I think she's really fine. I think it gives a very good impression.
So I will try to be careful when I say things. I've been in the room with her 3 times. I am not a close friend of hers. I am not a confidant, but I've been in the room. And so, for example, once was actually she was out supporting a delegate for election who is a good, very strong, a good acquaintance of mine who I've known for many years. A delegate, a state delegate, you're talking about a relatively small community and otherwise. She spent some time speaking, and I've been to many cases. This is when she was running for president, and this was in Virginia. And I've been to many of these events with a senior politician. And very frequently they come and they'll give what in English is called the stump speech. This is my speech about the world. And they'll sneak in 1 or 2 sentences about the person that they are supposedly supporting.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris spent 30 minutes speaking. She spent 25 minutes speaking about the candidate in a warm, knowledgeable, supportive, decent way, as if she had known him all her life, and she hadn't. I thought that was very impressive, both in her ability to communicate and just in her warm decency, because she was there to support a local candidate, and she spent her time supporting the local candidate far more than saying, support me for president. And then in the room, again, I'm not somebody who's a close friend of her, there were people who she had been in meetings with 2, 3, 4 years earlier, and she was greeting them by name, hugs, knowledgeable, that sort of thing. Is that it is a political skill to remember people and to be able to engage with them. But that sort of substantive warmness obviously made a positive impression on me. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people who work around her have respect for her, and then you can watch her in the United States in political hearings and otherwise with serious substance. But then if you watch Twitter or otherwise, you will see news of her dancing and smiling and otherwise. So for a breath of fresh air, substance with a human decency
Yeah.
as well. Is that answering? Is that
Yes, I agree completely, because I saw the debate, the vice president's debate, and I like her very much, and anyway, okay,
no,
I stop. I don't ask more. Thank you.
You're welcome. Daniel has been warned. I can answer questions forever.
No, I think we can start, and there are more people that will be joining in, but it's 9:08 and it's time to start. I mean, there's 8 minutes of courtesy. I think that it's enough. Bueno, diré algunes paraules en català i després ja començarem. Avui, com ja us havíem anunciat, tenim l'Adam Siegel, no? Perquè ens expliqui una miqueta com serà l'Amèrica de Biden amb els temes d'energia. Jo no presentaré l'Adam, ho farà el Ferran Puig Villar, que és un habitual de la nostra tertúlia, alguna vegada com a ponent i moltes vegades com a participant, diguem-ne, no? Ell és molt actiu en alguns foros amb altres persones de la resta del món, i quan li vaig comentar, escolta, Ferran, tu coneixeries algú que ens pogués fer aquesta sessió, doncs de seguida es va posar en marxa i a través dels seus innombrables contactes doncs va sorgir la proposta de l'Adam, a qui agraïm moltíssim estar aquí, perquè evidentment no formar part de la nostra comunitat, no està implicat amb nosaltres i en canvi ha sigut prou generós com per venir a compartir 2 hores amb nosaltres, més 1 hora i mitja ben bona que porta amb mi i amb el Ferran abans preparant aquesta sessió i comentant una miqueta les dinàmiques i tot plegat. Abans de seguir, 2 coses només, us volia dir. I donaré pas al Ferran perquè us digui qui és l'Adam, diguem-ne. Una cosa, perdó. I és que en la següent sessió serà el dia 16 de desembre, tindrem el Jesús Izquierdo, que és un enginyer nuclear que està en el projecte ITER, aquest de la fusió nuclear, és d'un grup que està aquí a Barcelona, d'aquests 100 persones, em penso alguna cosa així que hi ha aquí a Barcelona, però evidentment està a Cadaraix i està absolutament al corrent de tot el que està passant allà i li hem demanat que ens expliqui l'estat actual i les perspectives del projecte. Això serà el dia 16. Ja rebeu els recordatoris habituals, però perquè ho sapigueu. I, en fi, jo et dono la paraula al Ferran, que serà curt, i a partir de llavors, a partir d'ara ja serà tot en anglès i a partir de després també. Les preguntes que feu, si us sentiu més còmodes fent-les en català, jo les traduiré, no patiu. Si les feu directament en anglès, jo les posaré amb ell, però ell les podrà llegir també. Diguem-ne, vosaltres mateixos, com us sentiu més còmodes. En Ferran, ja pots començar.
Sí, hola, bona nit a tothom. Good evening, good afternoon, Adam. After the test we conducted before, and knowing that I have your permission, I will make the presentation in Catalan, okay?
Yes.
Well, bé, doncs bona nit. Us he de dir que aquesta xerrada va estar preparada abans de les eleccions. Teníem preparats 2 candidats, és a dir, 2 persones, en funció de si guanyava un o guanyava l'altre, i jo crec que si no la majoria, si no tots, segur que la majoria celebren que avui tinguéssim aquí a l'Adam, que és el que correspon a la victòria de Joe Biden. El fet de que ell estigui aquí ve donat bàsicament per 3 coses. Una és que ell és un consultor d'alt nivell. Ell diu que està a la intersecció d'energia, clima, seguretat nacional, business, empresa i societat. Ell ha treballat com a consultor per empreses de la Fortune 500, també fa no només de consultors, sinó també labors executives en qüestions de fusions, adquisicions, mergers, acquisitions i tot això. No? L'altre és que ell porta essent políticament actiu durant almenys 10 anys en el Partit Demòcrata i amb la seva labor professional ha tingut contactes i manté contactes amb persones que ara mateix estan en el comitè de transició de Joe Biden. No? Primer pensàvem que ell pertanyia al comitè de transició, això no era exacte, però en tot cas ell està perfectament en contacte amb totes les persones del nivell. Ara feia un moment ens explicava que coneixia la vicepresidenta i que haurà tingut també contactes al més alt nivell. No? Bé, hi ha una... Val a dir que del comitè aquest de transició hi ha unes 200 persones i 15, que és una bona proporció, estan en el terreny de la qüestió clima-energia. Hi ha una tercera raó, que és més casolana, diguéssim, és que la seva dona és de Toulouse. I llavors ell li hagués agradat venir aquí, ens ho he explicat abans, poder venir aquí físicament, no? Estar entre nosaltres i estalviar-se la sogra, que quan ve a Barcelona, es veu que hi ha estat més d'una vegada, doncs ha hagut de venir acompanyat per la sogra. A veure, vosaltres podeu veure en el perfil de LinkedIn, podeu veure el seu currículum, és una cosa espectacular i segur que estaria encantat de tenir activitats amb qualsevol de vosaltres que poguéssiu estar interessats. Finalment, dir que jo conec l'Adam de les activitats com a publisher, no? Com a editor de blogs a internet. Ell té 2 blogs en els quals publica regularment. Un és Get Energy Smart Now, ja sabeu el que vol dir, és a dir, allà tracta bàsicament de temes energètico-climàtics, potser més la qüestió energètica que la climàtica, i un altre blog que a mi m'agrada especialment perquè és, diguem, aquell que posa el rigor en les coses, en les coses sobretot climàtiques, no? Que es titula And then there is physics. És a dir, que és una persona ben conscient de la... Ara posa aquí ell amb una cara com si potser m'hagués equivocat, però crec que sí, que efectivament té aquests 2 blogs i que allà, diguéssim, toca de peus a terra, toca la realitat física de manera concreta. Jo no tinc res més a dir, segur que el disfrutareu i veurem que tenim l'esperança de conèixer que als Estats Units encerta una nova era. Thank you, Adam, and the floor is yours.
So first, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the invite, Daniel and Ferran. And thank you for tolerating my failure to speak Catalan. I barely speak English on a good day, so I will not make you suffer through my effort to do. 2 caveats, one of which is when I'm sober tomorrow, I won't back anything I said today. I'll try to, so I will give you my best understanding of the situation, but it could change any minute. We're in a very fluid and changing situation in the United States. The second is very quickly, Ferran. Ferran and I know each other through a back channel group, which originated over a decade ago, and I'm not quite sure when Ferran joined, but this originated when people were attacking climate scientists, and it was putting together scientists with communicators and people who understand to try to fight climate denial around the world. The blog that he mentioned in there is physics is by one of the other people in the group and not mine. I'm not a physicist, and I struggle to understand some of the material there. No, that's another person who's involved with us in this whole sort of global fight to try to support truth when it comes to climate science. I wanted to speak, so there's one other thing is I'm prepared to take questions at any point. If I get into a habit of speaking too fast or otherwise, please feel free to interrupt or raise a hand. And I will have a few bullets of what I plan to speak on, but I am perfectly comfortable with the conversation going to where it should be rather than to what I thought I would say. So here showing up, should be showing up, is, do you see my slides? Is my, no, my slides are not showing up. Just a second. Are they showing up? No. Okay.
No.
So I'm thinking that this might be the background. Just give me 1 second. So basically, I will be speaking about providing some perspectives on the Biden administration when it comes to climate and energy. Let us try this share screen again. Let's go to slideshow. And then 1 minute. And if we don't do it, my slides aren't that important. Okay, I am not showing these. Let's see, it says, why is it not sharing? Anyways, actually, would you be able to share your screen with these slides, Daniel?
I think it's better if you open first the presentation and you prepare to present, and then you share.
I do what? And then
you try to present as if you were presenting your computer, and then you share the screen.
No.
I apologize for this. This is not a normal for me. It says to me that I'm sharing. Just 1 second. Can you all speak in Catalan for 1 minute, and I will have somebody come and rescue it. My technical support.
Biden.
It's not showing up. You can see where I am.
No, we are seeing your slides now.
No, it's not. It's not.
Ara, veieu aquesta...
There it is.
Sí.
Now is it working?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
No,
I apologize about this.
no, Adam, the
Dan-
other thing is that now I control the
Okay.
slides, so you just tell me when to change, okay?
Right, and so the problem, which is no big problem, I lost 2 slides that I added after our conversation. So
Okay.
why don't we just go to the next slide?
Okay.
The key thing here is, if we're talking climate in the United States and the Democrats, it's quite striking. I think everyone on this call knows this, but sometimes it's just strong to see this. The amount of change from when Barack Obama and Joe Biden were about to be president and vice president, to the change in the world to when it is Joe Biden to be president and Kamala Harris. A decade ago around the world, there were very few circumstances where renewable energy was cheaper than fossil fuels. Most of the world now, for new energy, new power, clean energy is cheaper. In the United States, on other things, it's not just clean energy becoming cheap, but it is the understanding that climate change, the word climate crisis, politicians in the United States did not use 12 years ago. Joe Biden talks about the climate crisis. We have political challenges and we have other challenges, but 12 years ago, there was an economic crisis of the banks failing. Now there's an economic coronavirus challenge. But 12 years ago, clean energy was part of Obama's response to the economic crisis. It is central to how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are looking to change the world and change the administration. So the next slide. And I will only have 2 slides. This is just an organizational slide, which is that when it comes down to it, Joe Biden was elected with a mandate from the American people to work on climate and clean energy. He used some of the very last advertisements in the political campaign were on climate and clean energy. The largest policy discussions were about climate and clean energy. it was a thread in the Democratic Party. There was a competition to have bigger offerings in climate and clean energy. So there is public support. It was voted on in terms of, yes, Joe Biden has, what is it today, 7 million more votes than Donald Trump, something like that. Sorry, I can't believe that as many people voted for Trump as they did, but still Joe Biden has far more. But if you look at the public support for clean energy and put aside climate, even Republicans support clean energy very strongly. That's been around for a long time, but now the previous slide, the economics are much better. So we have public support for clean energy. The president-elect campaigned on this. The centerpiece of the Biden plan is called Build Back Better, is to not just try to create jobs to solve, to respond that we have an economic challenge and throw money into the economy to create jobs, but to leverage these resources. So it's not disaster relief, it's not reconstruction, it's trying to deal with the pain that society has right now while creating a better world for the US economy, but for a better world in terms of a cleaner economy. And the plan is $2 trillion over 5 years, which is very serious amount. Will that solve climate change? No. Will it make the US economy totally green? No, but it's quite significant. Within one of the things to think about with the Build Back Better and that climate mandate is that within the Democratic Party, this is very strong. Joe Biden is much more aggressive than what Obama Biden were when in the office, much more aggressive than what Hillary Clinton's plan was. But Biden was almost moderate in the US primary election, and he was pushed to be more aggressive. The example being that the original Biden plan on the electricity sector on power was that it would be carbon neutral, it would be zero carbon by 2050. The plan now is for carbon neutrality by 2035. So within the Build Back Better, there's really one of the important ways to think about the Biden and the Biden team construct is that there's a focus, sort of a three-piece focus, which are standards, investments, and justice. When we talk about standards, that is that refrigerators will work. We'll only use a certain amount, and that the standard will get stricter on how much electricity a refrigerator can use. Standards will be that the power sector will be carbon neutral by 2035, and there will be standards for how utilities need to be reducing. There will be standards for building, there will be standards. So it will be a driven by experts and leveraging science, but it's a standards-based approach as a critical part of this. The second is an awareness for investment. That's where an awful lot of that 2 trillion is, that we need to invest in society to build public transit, to put in clean energy, to, for example, Joe Biden has a plan for 500,000 electrical chargers for 500,000 chargers for electrical vehicles in 5 years. There are many ways of looking at this, but according to some of the electric vehicle analysis, that 500,000 additional public chargers creates an opportunity space for 25 million more electric cars, or about 20% of the total US fleet. So it is standards, investment, and then justice. Around the world, but certainly in the United States, we have serious problems of environmental justice. Poorer people, and generally people, of color, minorities who are poor, who are less educated, live in community areas where we put our chemical plants, where we put our power plants, where we have more pollution, where we have maintenance sheds for doing diesel, And so a significant sort of test for everything that the Biden administration is going to try to do will be, how does this relate to injustice in the society, whether that is economic justice, whether that is environmental justice or social justice. And the target is, or the statement is, that 40% of the investments will be addressing environmental injustices. And an example that I work in a space that I care about is moving in the United States. We have far more our school children, a much higher percentage go to school on school buses. Those buses are diesel fumes, and those fumes cause significant health problems. But the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be in a school bus. So if we replace diesel school buses, we can save money for local communities, we can lower noise, we can make students perform better, and the benefits are even more in poorer. The general society does much better, but poorer communities do much better. However, we sit, sadly, all of you perhaps have become experts in the US Electoral College. Sadly, you are watching, it's a global issue of the crazy nature of the United States politics and political situation. What the Biden-Harris team will be able to do on clean energy massively changes depending on who controls the US Senate. Right now, we have the Georgia elections will be on 5 January. If those two end up being the Democrats who are elected, both of those are very liberal people who care about climate change in different ways. John Ossoff cares about climate in sort of a climate activist environmentalist. He's had experience and spoken to that. And Reverend Warnock is a real voice on the environmental justice side. But both of them will be, the current Republicans are two of the climate science denying Republicans who have caused problems. They would be replaced by two very liberal senators. And if the two Democrats in Georgia win, then the US Senate is tied at 50-50, and that Vice President Harris will be the equivalent of a 51st senator for making decisions. If it is, sadly, you all probably know his name, if Senator McConnell, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, a coal lover, a climate denier, is in control of the US Senate, almost nothing will happen that requires congressional action. If it is 50-50 with Senator Harris, Vice President Harris being the deciding vote, I would expect within 6 months, we will have at least one more state, which will have 2 more Democratic senators. So it will be 50-50 before June, and not everything in Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan would occur, but an awful lot would occur. So we are sitting in great uncertainty in the United States and perhaps globally as to what will happen for another month and maybe 5 to 6 days. The world will be different on January 10th than today. And then another thing in terms of the uncertainty is a key point in looking the US government. Far more of the people are political appointees, are assigned by the president and vice president, and are not career civil servants. I believe the number will be in the range of 10 to 15,000 people who are sort of the top of the US government, who are political appointees from the Biden-Harris team. And so far, the people announced are mainly people who understand what climate change is. Many of them, for example, there were just the economic advisors. Several of them have written on climate and clean energy economics. If it is people like that, you may have an administration doing things very differently. Then, for example, let me drop a name, Rahm Emanuel, who was a chief of staff to Barack Obama and the mayor of Chicago, who wants a job in administration, from all we can tell, was one of the #1 obstacles in the first 4 years of the Obama administration for moving aggressively on climate and energy issues. He did not think it was winning politically, and he did not want the president to be speaking about it or doing any serious actions on it. So personnel can drive things quite significantly. So far, the most radical, aggressive people on climate and clean energy are not getting jobs, but some highly competent, knowledgeable, capable people are. When we talk about personnel as policy, another issue obviously is the personality of the president. So I will talk about what can be done via administration, but Joe Biden is somebody who grew up, so to speak, as a US senator. He has a nostalgic, I would say, but he has a view that his personality will enable him working with all of the US senators, and that he will be able to create deals with the Republicans, and that he can talk to them and negotiate and create opportunities, which suggests doing things perhaps very slowly to try to create opportunities. I do not think that any realist looking at how the US political system works, whether an American sitting in the United States or somebody from overseas, can look at the Republican Party, Donald Trump's role, and how they have been acting for the past 10 years, and honestly believe that they will make an effort to try to help Joe Biden succeed, and that they will, some of the biggest financial supporters for the Republican Party are oil companies, coal companies, natural gas companies, and financial interests such as automobile manufacturers that are not building clean electric vehicles. It is hard to see that the Republicans would be supportive of any serious action on clean energy and climate. We can take down the slide, just because that's sort of going through it, is that's sort of the outline of the point, is that we can talk about what Joe Biden's concepts of plans are, though we don't know if anything that requires the US Congress to appropriate, to give money, will be able to be done. So if we think about the plan, that the public plan, but the Build Back Better would put in significant money for infrastructure. And one of the key points is almost everything is tied back how to create jobs and American jobs. But it is to build back, to work on parks, to improve water systems. The United States, when I go to Europe, people frequently complain about infrastructure and how long things take to build. But when we grade, without question, across the United States, our investment in our own infrastructure is behind what you see anywhere in Western Europe, Spain, France, Germany, otherwise. Our roads are crumbling, our water systems are poorly leaking and otherwise. So it's an investment of going and building back that infrastructure, but building it back, greener, with solar panels supporting them, with more efficient water systems, but also universal high quality internet access. The auto industry is the drive. I mentioned the idea for 500,000 electric chargers spread across the country, but is to try to drive the US auto industry quickly to a leading position rather than following position on the traditional US auto industry, a leading industry in electric vehicles. Transportation, a call for transit, public transportation, in zero emission public transit for every city in the United States above 100,000 people. So light rail, electric buses, infrastructure for pedestrians and bicyclists. The power sector, I already said, was going to carbon-free electricity by 2035. And then when we keep talking about infrastructure, is to look at buildings and to go back and weatherize at least 2 million homes over 4 years and upgrade millions more buildings with energy efficiency to net zero and otherwise, and to create jobs while doing this. So, and then a big part of that is that we, is on addition to going back, is to create 1.5 million LEED or sustainable homes, and basically net zero, zero carbon. Also significant investments to try to drive forward technologies and lower their costs. Created 12 years ago was the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy, ARPA-E. The Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy has been involved in trying to take innovations and helping them get to market faster. And it is the requirement for something for them to invest on is they have to be able to describe how would this change the world? It has to be big, not small, in terms of potential impact. The Biden people are looking to perhaps increase the investment in that per year by as much as 10 times. Also in agriculture, how to do what's called climate smart agriculture, creating jobs, and greening the rural communities. But a big part of it is problems in the United States, like everywhere, but a lot of our problems end up being very little interesting items within the financial world. So for example, for an oil company, if they have drilled a well, it ends up being part of their active activity and potentially productive. If they expend resources to cap it, it ends up costing them on the stock market and their potential reserves. So that what we have in the United States is hundreds of thousands of oil and gas wells that are not producing any oil or natural gas, but that have not been plugged and that are leaking methane and oil into water systems. And so one of the concepts is to in essence subsidize oil and natural gas companies by taking this cost away from them and devoting 100,000 people to jobs from the oil industry to capping and closing these bad wells. And then I've also said is throughout this, the question is going to be, if they're able to get these resources, is how to do so through creation of union jobs and in communities that we call left behind communities that are doing poorly, and righting wrongs in communities that have really borne the brunt of pollution. Okay, so this is the plan. If there's a Congress to work with and Joe Biden's able to get $2 trillion US dollars over 4 years to invest, the United States is going to be spending like crazy, and really we will see massive and fast change. It's hard. First of all, the odds, who knows who will be elected from Georgia? So there's will we have Georgia? Oh, by the way, in the United States, also to add, going back in a complexity, is even if we win in Georgia, there are several of the Democratic senators, the 50, who are very closely tied to traditional fossil fuels. For example, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, his personal family fortune of hundreds of millions of euros is in coal industry. He was elected, when he was first elected to Senate, he was elected with one of his advertisements where he actually took a rifle and shot a bullet through the climate energy bill that was under consideration, saying that if he elected to the Senate, he would kill any effort to act on climate. So even if the Democrats control the Senate, what Joe Biden wants is not necessarily what Joe Biden gets. If Senator McConnell controls the Senate, if the Republicans control the Senate, what Joe Biden wants probably is what Senator McConnell will not want, and very little will get through the Senate that will really have a clean energy, with one real big exception. That one exception is that it's part of sort of climate science delayer tactic around the world, but is we need to invest in innovation as if there's some future creation that we can use to solve climate. So that what we could expect if the Republicans control the Senate in terms of money is that when I mentioned that Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy, places that focus on investments in research and development early stages of technology are quite possibly or quite likely to get significant investment. Okay, this is all now talking the politics and what happens in the Senate. The other part of the equation is the United States, an administration, it can't write the check. It can't create the money because that has to come through Congress. It can't create laws, but the administration has tremendous power. There are over 100 significant environmental rules that Donald Trump did damaging things to. Those are well known to the people in the Biden transition team. And there are already draft pieces of documents that all they require is a president to sign them, and they are reversed. Some of them are on energy efficiency. Some of them are allowing pollution, different types of pollution like mercury pollution out of coal-fired stacks. Right now, there is one that's potentially going to go forward that will allow what is called taking, more killing of birds. So there are things that a President Biden can do immediately, such as, you are all aware, Donald Trump removed the United States from the Paris Accord. That will be changed on the afternoon of January 20th, or maybe the 21st, but that all the president can do that with a signature. The United States will rejoin the World Health Organization. That just requires a signature. But the president can also do things that he can direct. For example, there's the target of the 2035 for clean power. He can direct people who are involved in regulation of utilities to take the side of to drive the regulations toward that on how electricity is moved and valued between places. Right now, one of the things that he can, right now, the federal government under Donald Trump is fighting states that are trying to force cars and trucks to be less polluting. Joe Biden can reverse that overnight. Can also do things like can make it very difficult to mine coal on federal lands, which is very significant, oil and natural gas, but also offshore wind is one of the exploding areas in renewable energy. The Trump administration has done some things to make it hard to get permits for that, which has already delayed a few projects and raised their costs. The Biden team could do the reverse and accelerate, and we expect that to be. Also, obviously, the signaling of John Kerry, who cares about climate change you can get him in the private room and he will make me look quiet and talk for hours on climate. He is our, the former senator, former secretary of state, former presidential candidate as the international envoy on climate. And we are likely to see someone else who will be directly reporting to the president, whose responsibility will be coordinating domestically on climate. So you will have two powerful people with direct access to President Biden, whose job it will be internationally and domestically forcing the US government to work together and work with others to figure out how to work on climate and clean energy. And I think, so one of the problems we have is that going back in the uncertainty, I've said that Joe Biden's nature is to be a collaborator, to work with others and to seek consensus. He's not been somebody through his careers who has said, this is what, my door is open. If you want to work with mine, if you don't work with me, I will do this. There's a lot of power that he could have as president to act very aggressively across a lot of areas. If you want to think about it in a pro-democratic, pro-equality, pro-science, pro-clean energy, pro-creating action on clean energy, climate action to mitigate and adapt to climate change, both in the United States and globally, he could do an awful lot. But many of us wonder whether his personality will allow him to do that. By the way, one of the major changes that will occur is that Donald Trump has been, and the administration and the people under him obviously deny climate science, have been removed, damaging personnel who work on climate science. Climate science will return to the US government websites, not probably January 20th, but expect that to be there in February. There may be a under the Trump administration, if somebody asked for money for researching an energy system and said it will help us on climate, they did not get the money. And what the Biden administration can do is reverse and say, the US government spends hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year. The Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration can put climate clean energy requirements on all of that procurement without any congressional action. The question will be whether the Biden-Harris team will be that aggressive. They're already, I said, personnel is politics. So Joe Biden is that personnel. Some of the people that have been appointed are understanding of and ready for that sort of aggressive action. Some are not. So when I say we are living in a time of uncertainty because we don't know who's going to control the US Senate. We don't know who the personnel are going to be. And while Joe Biden is certainly speaking and has a plan on climate change, we do not know whether he's going to go against 78 years of his personal history and act far more aggressively than we've ever seen him act. Hopefully that confused you further than you already were. There was some of it was hopefully interesting, and I will be glad. I don't know if Rand talked. I've been working on and off in politics for 15 years, but I also have done things like due diligence on early stage technologies for Fortune 500 firms. I heard that in the introduction, but also I've been on the other side with brand new startups, bringing them through. So I work across a lot of clean energy technologies. It's my personal fascination, and how to leap the innovator's valley of death. I don't know how much that is this group. I didn't really talk about that sort of challenge space and what might happen in the next 2 years. Anyways, if there's some questions, thoughts, reactions, I welcome engagement.
Okay.
Yeah, I do have a question.
And Albert, I see yours, but go ahead. Go ahead with the question.
Okay, did you say that the new administration will try by 2035 to be carbon neutral?
Be careful in the words. Power sector is electricity. So the target is to have the US electricity system by 2035.
Okay.
And if you look at what's happening with solar, wind, also nuclear power. So it's not the entire, I think the entire economy. If I talk to the people, they believe it's possible in the 2040s. The objective is 2050 for carbon neutrality across the economy. So if I can go back to, so I see some questions. So Albert, it is, so there's a different whole challenge in the United States than it is globally. The question that Albert asked me, and if others don't see, is, I'll put aside the Christmas, but okay, the Democrats get the Senate. What will be the re-election in 4 years? Will the policies be welcomed by the media and subsequently by the voters? There's a serious challenge. The Republican Party, actually, I'll do a story. I had an acquaintance who worked in the Bush administration. He was a career civil servant. So he was a civil servant, but he worked in a situation where for 4 years at 5:30 every morning, he was on a phone call with something like well over 1,000 people across the US government. That also included some Fox News executives listening in. And the 5:30 in the morning call was, some Murdoch, Sky News, was, this is our message from the day, for the day. this is what you are supposed to say, and we will fire you if you say anything else. And that was the message to the US government internally, but also for speaking externally. It was a coordinated machine. The Republican Party of today is even worse than it was under Bush. And no matter what Donald Trump says, it gets echoed, reinforced, no matter how crazy it is. And they speak very much with one voice. The Democratic Party is filled with intellectuals and people who are passionate and care about their issues. And it is very hard to get an agreement on a single issue and a unified voice on anything. So item number one is, what we've had is a media, when they encounter the Republicans, they have a single solitary message. When they deal with the Democrats on almost every issue, they can hear 10 different voices. And they will have complaints from within the Democratic Party about whatever they do. Also is that we have a real problem. There's, if you're really interested in this, Albert, there's Jay Rosen from New York University is one of the best sort of media professors and commentators, I think, in the United States. Jay really focuses on that both sides, that the media likes to handle both sides, at least in the United States and in many parts of the world, that both sides are equal. So we have one side that is insane, not factual, and the other side is, in Europe, conservative, but sort of moderate liberal. Well, what we're going to do is take the craziness, insane lies, and the moderation, not really aggressive, and we'll meet them in the middle because obviously both sides have truth. So there's a real problem. The Democrats have failed to deal with this effectively for 30 years. There's no, a lot of people are raising this as an issue. We don't necessarily know whether, that might be the Christmas tale of being dealt with it. In the United States as well, we've had the bifurcation and the breakup because of social media around the world, but in the Facebook and otherwise, but in the United States, far more than in Europe, we have what is right-wing media, which is we have small little radio stations that are totally dominated by the right wing. And there are portions of the country that small little newspapers that are right-wing, and Fox News and Facebook and these right-wing media stations are all that people hear. So cracking through that, unless some very rich person decides to put $1 billion into creating an alternative, that's a battle. However, there are ways, and I'm part of trying to gauge this, is if the Biden administration, if Joe Biden and others realize that they have this messaging problem and they treat every single day as they are in a political campaign and that they need to be winning the popular discussion every single day, I think it is possible that 4 years from now, I think the odds are not Joe Biden being reelected because of his age, but it's 4 years from now that perhaps it's President-elect Kamala Harris would be a good thing. So I think it is a real risk that there are many people who focus on that, who there's real reason to think the House of Representatives is Democratic right now, and it will take a lot to have that Democratic Party in 2 years after the election, because in what are called the midterm elections, where the party opposing the president almost always wins. So it is a serious risk. There are many of us who believe that acting aggressively on climate, first of all, it has to be done. The Republicans are going to scream, the American expression, they're going to scream bloody murder no matter what Joe Biden and the Democrats do. So you might as well do it really forcefully and spend your time explaining why and see whether you can win the public along while you're doing the right thing. Is that a short answer to you, Albert? Get to that a little bit. So the question being the oil and US oil and natural gas firms. So there are two different things. There are three pieces to this. First of all, you're not saying the coal. So the coal firms are obviously opposed to this, but they are dying in the United States as they are in most places of the world. I would also separate the oil and gas. Many of them are the same. The oil firms, it is interesting to watch what is happening with the oil majors around the world. In Europe, whether or not it is enough, but if I look at Equinor, if I look at it, British Petroleum, if I look at Royal Dutch Shell, if I look at Total, they're talking about climate change. Maybe not enough, but in serious ways. They are investing in renewable energy, maybe not enough, but in billions of dollars. They are changing. When you talk to their vice presidents of strategy or otherwise, they are, you know, within the world of discussion about acting on climate. If you go to the US oil majors, if you go to Exxon Mobil, they are still funding people who do climate denial. And they are trying to avoid any action like crazy. So they are fighting tooth and nail, not trying to. ExxonMobil, from my impression, is trying to figure out how it can extract as much profit as possible in the next 10 to 15 years and doesn't care what exists in the world 20 years from now. I don't think that's true when I talk to Equinor, BP, Shell, and such. So the US oil majors are fighting like crazy. The gas side of the equation has been dominated by people thinking, we're going to kill off coal and natural gas. And the problem is, in the United States, we have been saying natural gas is clean for 30, 40 years. The buses on natural gas are cleaner than diesel. That's good. That it pollutes less than coal. That's good. And it is a bridge to the future. A good share of the Democratic Party still thinks that. That was a major part of the Obama-Biden administration. The gas supporting firms, one, do not like the idea of carbon-free by 2035. They do not like it. They will fight it. They will fund resources against it. But they think, there are others that think that they will be able to profit from the gas continuing to replace coal, and that will give them profits for the years to come.
Okay, I have a question for you, Adam. You mentioned that the Republicans communicate with one clear voice, and the Democrats are more
fractured.
And you also said that that not all the Democrats would be in favor of the climate, Biden's climate policies. You mentioned that person from West Virginia, the senator from West Virginia. And my question is, in the Republican side, everybody in the Senate thinks the same, or there are also exceptions?
So what has happened in the Republican Party? I mean, there are people. So one of my background items is I'm one of those people who Al Gore trained to give his climate presentation. As of a few years ago, I don't know if it's still true, I'm the only person who's given it to Republican members of Congress. There are conversations I've had that were very productive when they were behind a closed door and there was no reporter or camera there. And then when they go into public, they would be anti, climate change is not real type people. In one case, within an hour of my having spent 3 hours with that person in a very reasonable way. They get, so courage is not rewarded in American politics often. And the way that our political system is set up for senators and members of Congress, too often, it is the political party primary which is more important than our general election. And so if a senator who actually understands that climate change is real, or comes out and says that, in the next election, there will be a climate denier from their right who comes out and attacks them. And you will see that there are a few there are people who can be worked with in the Republican Party, let us say, on the edges for incremental pieces of policy. But it has been a long time since a significant Republican politician has stood up and said, climate change is a very serious problem and we need to do something about it. And the way Senator McConnell is a dictator in running the Senate, they speak with a near unanimous voice on almost everything. He does not allow dissent. He punishes people who dissent. And then within the political system that is the Republican Party, dissenters from the ideological line are punished very harshly. And they're scared. I mean, whether that is the right thing, whether that is a decent thing, whether that is I call that profiles and lack of courage. You may not be aware, one of the best books about President Kennedy and the people around him was called Profiles in Courage, was about great American leaders, 60 years ago. But so profiles and lack of courage, this is the reality that we face, is that Republicans will not, unless something radically changes, Republicans will not embrace serious climate action. And to the extent that, for example, there was a caucus, a bipartisan climate caucus in the House of Representatives, to the extent the Republicans supported action, it was very, very little. It was not serious. It was not anything to the scale and magnitude of what's required. So I'm pessimistic.
Okay. Ferran.
I'm worried. Did I bore everyone, or are there some other questions?
No. You have a question from Ferran.
I see that. I see that.
It's in English. You probably.
So Fran and I disagree on the lower energy the question of lower OEIs, and we can get into that technical discussion quite a bit. I do like to use the financial surrogates, and what we are seeing is with every doubling of solar, is it a 20% reduction? But we are seeing that it is a manufacturing process, and the lessons, I come from part of my background is sort of industrial base in shipbuilding and military systems and otherwise, but we are seeing a constant learning curve with a constantly falling, actually that's in, if anyone wants to go, it's on the top blog post on my blog, is a slide about that learning curve linking to source, but we are seeing a lowering in cost. And that also part of that lower EROEI is that we have exaggerated that how low the energy return, EROEI, energy return on energy invested, that the solar energy return on energy invested, I think one is better than we've been calculating. And I was a co-author with, 50 of us, or no, 30 of us co-authoring a piece on that. But one of the things is that the cost is going down, but every single day, the energy return is getting better on the solar because we're getting better at doing it. We're spending less resources to get the same watt of electricity. You can go down, which was learning curve. Maybe the learning curve slide wasn't there. Sorry,
No,
it was.
This is the one for the cost of batteries.
Batteries, right. But also that there's a learning curve in the exponential. So the source for the item above that, I think, was on a learning curve. So here is price reductions, but that source document has a whole discussion about learning curves. As we've seen a very, very consistent, for 40 years now, of solar photovoltaics, of the learning curve in the production of that technology. Now that technology is only a small part, but we're seeing a similar learning curve in the deployment on homes and in industrial for photovoltaics. Offshore wind and wind turbines, same thing. We are getting better at deploying it for lower cost, and it is lower, as part of the lower cost, it is lower energy for demand, lower energy invested for every future energy production. So if we can go back to the, so I think that there's several forms of the energy density, and I was reacting to one of it, which one of the discussions is, oh, solar takes up so much more land than wind or otherwise. So there's what's called in English energy sprawl. I was thinking about that for a moment. But I think when we're in the power sector, the renewables offer the opportunity for far, far lower electricity costs. And when we look at the fully burdened energy requirements to deliver the coal and otherwise, I think we're going to be at a higher EROEI for the overall system, I think, one. And I want to give you a discussion I was just starting to look at, but the founder of Sun Edison, Jigar Shah, who ran the Climate War Room and now has created a new corporation, Generate Capital, that's now another $1 billion corporation he's created. Jigar is asserting that he sees at least 5 United States and maybe 10 within 5 years will stop charging electricity on a per kilowatt hour basis, and will start charging for power, start charging for electricity like we have cell phones or internet, which is you will just be paying a flat fee no matter how much you use. If that's true, and Jigar is a very, very bright man who's been working in this sort of world for a long time, and analysis is part of it, and many of his predictions have turned out to be right. If that's true, the whole discussion about the EROEI, we're in a totally different world than what utilities were and the power sector was 5 years ago, or even today. If what we're doing is just saying, I am paying you 20 euros a month, no matter how much electricity I use, all of a sudden the lights are going to be on all the time. He thinks that's going to be happening. So I think that we actually, the system will be driving down the costs and boosting public support rather than the reverse. And oh, by the way, if we talk about one of the ways that Biden can win is that consistently in the United States for 20 years, and I think this is true in Europe too, very, very high percentages of people, if you asked them if they wanted more solar, they said yes. If you asked them if they wanted more wind, they said yes. If you ask, the support for clean energy has been very, very strong. A decade ago, when we asked that question, the second question was, okay, you want solar, how much more will you pay to have clean electricity? All of a sudden, paying more was a problem. The question now is, okay, do you want solar? How much less do you want to pay to have your solar? Because your solar is cheaper than your coal, your solar is cheaper than your gas, your solar is cheaper than your nuclear. So if you want solar or wind, we'll save you money. It changes the equation for public support.
Okay. Questions? Anybody? Wow, Mariana.
So let me have a chance to read it, Mariana, and if somebody wants to ask, so nuclear power. I'll go to this. I'll go to the E, Luis. It's the shorter one's easier to start with. So we have 2 questions on nuclear power. So nuclear power is an arena where you can have bipartisan support. The Trump administration. So I have part of my professional background was at Northrop Grumman. Part of Northrop Grumman was what is now Newport News Shipbuilding, which is where we build aircraft carriers. If anyone's really in the nuclear space, they also have been involved in doing things with the nuclear industry, but nuclear ships, aircraft carriers, and submarines, they did a deal with Areva a decade ago that ended up falling flat. I was somewhat part of it. It's been a decade since I did a very large study of nuclear. I tried to argue against that AREVA project. But what we have seen in the United States is a failure to deliver on price large nuclear power plants. So we have the Vogtle, which I think is now 3 times its anticipated price in Georgia, the 2 plants there, and just they haven't delivered. For large nuclear power plants, let us just say 1 gigawatt, with the massive changes we've seen in the electrical system for the past decade or past 20 years, the idea of spending $15 billion and 15 years to get a 1 gigawatt facility that won't start providing power for 15 years when we don't know what the world will be like 15 years from now is very, very scary for any utility, is very scary for any local government. People will not, and the prices have not been delivering. We have a problem. I think the Vogtle plant will deliver now at euro cents, something like 20 euro cents per kilowatt hour, $200 US per megawatt hour. I can put solar on somebody's roof in the United States and be less than 10% of that. Or not 10%, sorry, about 1/6 of that. So it's not price competitive, very large, you know, it is in a business planning sense, it's very hard to go large nuclear. However, the small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors, are an intriguing opportunity for US military operations around the world and for remote facilities and remote communities like in Alaska and otherwise. And the Trump administration has put money into that with some special activities in the Department of Defense. And honestly, there's a good part of the Democratic Party that's comfortable and likes that and would support that. So nuclear is a space. The potential of investing in 4th generation is potentially, you know, a demonstration plant technology is potentially a space for bipartisan cooperation and agreement. Small modular reactors is more likely a space for cooperation and agreement between it. And then I think another one that's sort of intriguing is there are breakthrough spaces that are somewhat, so fission is what we were talking about, but if we look at fusion, there's a very intriguing set of very small fusion firms that may or may not be able to create small fusion reactors, but they've been funded out of Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy. There's work out of the Princeton Lab, National Laboratory, the Physics Laboratory, and otherwise. And there are a good 10 or so small fusion firms that if you get them all in the room, they claim if they had $2 billion in 10 years, there's a 50% chance that we'd have a 100 megawatt small fusion demonstration reactor by the middle of the 2030s. That's a story that I could see bipartisan support for as well. So large reactors have the real problem of the business case for them, for utilities, is very, very hard in the United States. We're seeing you have also, obviously, environmental organizations are opposed to it, but the business case alone really drives down the number of people who can or would support it. I could imagine some research, maybe attempting to do another large 4th gen as some sort of deal, because though I must say the biggest Republican supporter for that sort of thing has been Lamar Alexander, Senator Lamar Alexander, who's been willing to work on that with Democrats. He just retired, or he's retiring from the Senate. I don't know who will take up that mantle. So I owe going back to the longer one, so I'll take 15 seconds to read it. I expect, so I am not expert on the regional. I would expect that to occur. That is the sort of thing that that a Biden administration can do without, you know, congressional approval. The question is, to what extent will the United States try to take a leadership role in the Americas, both North America and across all of the Americas, for climate goals? And then what is, so that one is, I think the United States, just like joining Paris Accord, this is the sort of thing that will occur. I would expect the United States will at least be a good, honest actor on climate and clean energy in the America hemisphere, rather than being an opponent. I don't know what the chances are for the United States to, I mean, for a global agreement on limiting CO2 emissions, the Biden administration will re-sign into the Paris Accord and will sign into having targets. So I think that is just saying that the that's a 100%, it's near, as near to 100% I can imagine that the Biden administration will be back in the Paris Accord before the end of January. And there are very competent people who are involved in the US positions for the Paris Accord, who are senior positions in the Biden administration. Both the Secretary of the incoming Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor both worked to support policy for the Paris Accord. The new chair of the chair of the economic advisors, or one of the members of the economic advisors, is also somebody who worked on the Paris Accord. So I think it is absolute that there will be a sign into it. The question then is to what extent that will last. If we have a worse than Trump in 4 years, what does that mean for the United States role? So about dirty energy, fracking, I think I didn't talk about fracking. I didn't talk about that aspect of natural gas. I expect several things to happen. There will be a relatively fast move to stop any new natural gas on federal lands, which is a reasonably significant, it's a decent portion of the overall. But far more importantly is that the methane emissions have not been, the regulations related to methane emissions were not seriously focused on in the Trump administration. First of all, they were weakened. And then one of the many things, the sort of thing that a Biden administration could happen, is if you go and look at how regulation has been imposed and penalties, the amount of financial penalty for polluters in the United States has fallen, I think, by an order of magnitude under the Trump administration. So what will happen related to fracking is there will be imposition of serious methane. There is a belief of, if we have methane leakage out of natural gas is a very serious problem, that if we have regulation on the methane leakage to drive down the leakage, along with serious penalties for violating it, it will do very, very well in reducing the problems, the fugitive emissions related to fracking. One of the interesting things on that is, depending on how strict it is, it's interesting because the larger the firm, the more they support serious methane emissions restrictions, because they believe it provides them a competitive advantage against the small firms. So this is a case where, on sort of the climate friendly policy, at least to a little bit, that I would expect the ExxonMobil is standing up and saying, yes, we want it, just like a Chevron, just like Greenpeace, just like that. This is a space where you can actually find an alliance, at least partway, between major oil firms and people who care about the environment. For those, I think that the methane emissions is, when in the United States, and this was Joe Biden is 78 years old. Messages have gone on for a very long time. Gas since the 1980s has been promoted in the United States as natural gas. There are buses on our streets that say clean natural gas, and it's been promoted as a bridge fuel and a good thing. And that when we burn natural gas, it's 50% of the pollution of coal. If we have 3%, 2.5%, 3% fugitive methane emissions on a climate change, that natural gas is worse than coal. I don't know if it's true or not, because I'm not technical enough, but the Equinor people, when they tell me that they're able to drive down their fugitive emissions across their chain below 1%, I think in the United States, we're probably averaging at 4 to 5%. If we could drive from 4 to 5% down to 1% over a 5-year period, that would be a significant achievement, if that's possible. So so we have two hydrogen questions. I won't take Tesla for the moment. So hydrogen, I think, I was just on a panel. One of the things I was involved was clean energy for Biden. And I moderated a panel Wednesday night because Clean Energy for Biden raised money for the Biden campaign. We held meetings, but we also, some people developed policy papers. And one of them was specific, and the policy papers have been greeted, they're being read by the Biden team. That does not mean they'll be acted on. But there is a growing movement in the United States of that green hydrogen to be able to make renewable, to leverage renewables for making hydrogen is a significant opportunity. And oh, by the way, if we want US jobs, we're starting to fall behind seriously, Japan and Europe in this. And whether it's for steel making or for fuels, that this is potentially, hydrogen is potentially the path for decarbonizing aviation, that hydrogen, that renewable generated hydrogen might be our path for a key path for reducing the carbon footprint for steel and perhaps even cement. So I would imagine if I was not all encompassing about where the Republicans might agree, to create an industry where large corporations could make money off hydrogen might be the sort of thing that you could get innovative money out of, where Republicans would support Democrats. I'm not sure. Okay, for me on, so I have my biases and my opinions and my approaches. I won't say that the Tesla EV is the definitive, because I like some of the other cars coming around. I think it's really more of fuel cells cars, and then we can go from personal automobiles up, but from personal vehicles, electric versus hydrogen, the basic point is essentially everybody has electricity at their house. They don't have hydrogen at their house. Hydrogen, while there have been a lot of solutions to it, it creates its own set of storage and otherwise risks, costs and otherwise. Hydrogen, oh, by the way, is a very interesting problem for the firemen responding to an accident on the street, because it burns clean, it burns invisibly. So you can have a jet of fire at, what is it? Is it 1500 degrees Celsius? I forget how much, but you have this jet of fire that's invisible from that could be from a pinhole hydrogen leak of a car, potentially, that there are people of safety who worry about it. I mean, a lot of this has been addressed, but electric vehicles are working. They already are, depending on how you count it, they're already on cost parity for ownership, if not better than traditional ICE vehicles. Hydrogen is far behind and requires the creation of a new infrastructure. I think electric vehicles for small are well ahead. Now that is, I don't think it's just my opinion, but that's my opinion rather than a definitive. It becomes much more interesting when we start to go to large fleet vehicles. Does it make sense to have the Tesla electric truck with an 800-kilometer range versus if it's a truck that is sort of like a railroad, it's going from point to point, and maybe a hydrogen facility is much more effective for doing that rather than massive amounts of lithium-ion batteries. There's a real battle and discussion about that. If I go to hydrogen advocates, I know what the answers are. If I go to Tesla, I know what the answers are. The interesting one for me right now that I'm trying to figure out is that we may have that we've had these massive decreases in battery costs, and I think we might have a step function decrease coming, because there's going to be a whole new way to mine lithium green, which is taking geothermal heating water or geothermal electricity wastewater and potentially fracking wastewater and oil and natural wastewater, and taking the lithium ion, filtering out the lithium ion out of that water. So you're actually slightly cleaning up that wastewater and you're creating lithium ion. And it looks like, from what I can tell, that in a few years, the price of that lithium ion will be far less expensive than mining it out of the ground, and that the resource might be 10 times larger than our existing lithium ion mining activities. So if that exists, all of a sudden those, hundreds of kilowatt hours, if not actually probably megawatt hours. It's been a while since I've looked at the Tesla truck, but those megawatt hours of battery storage in the Tesla truck all of a sudden become incredibly less expensive, and that's a significant part of the truck's cost. And so I think renewable generate, I think it is an option. I think it is, I think it's not really entered the centerpiece of discussion in the US, because the US really, there's there are a couple of great people and great pieces on this. Saul Griffith is a key part of this. Another guy named Dave Roberts has written on this. But the US #1 is, for climate activists, when they've looked at energy, the #1 motto right now is electrify everything, make everything that you can possibly electric while you are cleaning up the electricity sources. And that combination is 80%, right? Or whatever, that is a huge portion, and that we know how to do a tremendous amount of that. And as we go down that path, it's not the electrify everything has gotten so much of the space for the thinkers that things like renewable hydrogen aren't, so to speak, mainstream in energy. Here, I'll use the technical term. In energy geek discussions, renewable energy isn't the first thing talked about. I think it's growing, just like it's growing in Europe. Anyone want to jump in? Do you want to, it's late in the evening there. There's always the ability to have tapas and a good drink before.
Just a political fiction. What would have happened if Bernie Sanders had won? I know that this is far from the reality, but what would be his policies on these issues?
I think his policies would be more aggressive. The challenge would be is that Bernie would, so the Biden team is being criticized, but if you look at who they're appointing, every single person has experience and knowledge with inside the government. Well, not every, but essentially everyone knows how government works. They know how bureaucracies work. They know how to get things done. The people who Bernie Sanders likely would have brought in don't fit that description. And while many of them on the climate space are good acquaintances of mine, they are passionate outside advocates and activists who don't know how to move a piece. The description is they don't know how to move a piece of paper around the department to get it signed. And so that we would have a lot of tripping. I would think that if it were Sanders, you would have where I've said personality is policy. Biden, I'm worried that Biden will be too cautious. Maybe Sanders would have been too aggressive in confrontation, but that also that we would have had a real problem of what are called learning curves of people going in and not having the experience of how to get things done inside an organization. And we would have just well-meaning, not saying unethical or bad, but I think we would have a lot of missteps and failures. And then also, a lot of these people, a lot of them I appreciate and like. And if we take like the Sunrise Movement, I was one of the early funders of them, but some of the people around the sun, they don't know, they haven't been around early stage energy technologies, and they don't know how to do a financial cost assessment and otherwise that they might make errors. So I think the Sanders administration would be more aggressive in rhetoric and maybe attempting to be more aggressive on policy, but would have more failures just because they were learning how to do things for several years. So hopefully that, so I, and let me tell you that, well, I worry about who he might have brought in, right? And it would be a different form of antagonism. And I think the road to victory it is amazing that, to me, as hopefully somebody who lives in the real world, that considering all of the failures of Donald Trump and the abysmal performance on COVID and his uncaring nature to 280,000 Americans dying, that he got 73 million votes. and Joe Biden was being called a socialist. Well, Bernie Sanders would actually be a socialist, even if in Europe he would be moderate center left at most. I don't know if he could have won. I think there would have been, I think Donald Trump probably would be not lying about being elected. He would have been reelected if Sanders had been the candidate. So let me talk. So I think I am, all right, so rare earth minerals, it's been a while since I've really looked at it. There look to be a lot of developing options related to rare earth metals, both by paths to reduce the requirements in certain technologies, as well as looking to the mining. It's been a while since I looked at it. I don't know if the investment is going on, for example, to reopen the mine in California. There are some mines in Africa and otherwise. I think there has been, certainly that dependency on China. What has happened is when China flexed its muscle due to that dependency, they ended up with some pretty bad negative reactions, and they've chosen not to flex the muscle in almost a decade. I don't know where and so I'm not expert on that. So whoever's asking, so Daniel,
That was me. That's
Luis. Yeah, I'm not expert. That's one that I'll have to pass. I think the problem is reducing, but I'm not sure to that. There was a question. Oh, so the United States is a natural gas exporter. I think there's a different issue of liquid natural gas is that, okay, so I've published on, I think liquid natural gas is a high risk for everybody involved as a business, and that it is somewhat a shell game with the pieces moving around, and whoever, or musical chairs would be the game where the music is on, but there's one less chair than the dancer, and the music stops and one person's left standing. Liquid natural gas to me is that financially in terms of risk. So I will take 6 or 7 years ago when was looking at Ukraine, and there were technologies that I know that can make synthetic gas from waste materials from crops. So biosynthetic fuels. Those died in the United States as technologies because those technologists looked at only the United States, and they were killed by the natural gas prices in the United States. But they could be producing in Ukraine without any further additional technological development. And once you start building them, the costs would go down. They could produce natural gas, or I don't want to use natural gas, synthetic gas rather than LNG in, for example, Ukraine at half the price of what LNG imports are from in Europe from elsewhere around the world, because of how much biomass waste there is in Ukraine. That at some point these technologies will start to deploy, and that there are many ways that I think that the natural gas, it roughly doubles the price at minimum, and more than that to be because you need to chill that gas so much. You have to pressurize it and lower the temperature, transport it, repressurize it. It's a huge energy and transport cost demand. So that the price in the United States, I think you need like $4 more extra elsewhere in the world to be able to make a price that you sell it in the United States. To be profitable, you need $4 or $5 more with the existing infrastructure. Well, I'm telling you, I know technologies that I could be producing gas on the ground from bio-waste at a lower price than that. And I think that what's going to happen is that around the world, solar prices are dropping, wind prices are dropping, that what is being provided by liquid natural gas, as, for example, Europe wants to lower its carbon load and looking at options for efficiency and otherwise, we're going to see the demand for that gas falling. And, I think there's going to be hopefully a virtuous circle where the lower demand in the United States and the low prices and more expensive financing are going to lower production in the United States, while around the world, the demand for gas is going down as well. I like frack. So there's a question, direct question about fracking. I like fracking for their new geothermal paths that rely on the technologies we developed from fracking. I think fracking created a huge boom in gas production that really has changed the world. But the way it's being done, first of all, the natural gas itself, okay, even at optimistically, it's only half as bad as coal. Well, half as bad as coal is still 100% bad. We can't afford that pollution. It's better, perfectly done, it's better than coal, but it's not what we should be investing in. It certainly changed the economics around the world. The different way I would do it is and so fracking, and then we have a lot of methane leakage related to fracking, and a lot of other damages environmentally has been occurring to fracking. A different one around the world is the US revolution with shale gas and fracking, and then fracking around the world started to move in, it's moved industries around the world. For example, there was no fertilizer plant built in the United States for quite a long time because the natural gas price was too high. I think what we're going to start to see, and you know what, parts of Spain can be this too, is we're going to start seeing industries move to where the solar resources are tremendous. We are getting close to 10 US dollars per megawatt hour for solar at large industrial facilities. At that price, it's much cheaper to use electricity to crack water to make nitrogen fertilizer than it is to buy natural gas in the United States and crack it. I think that we're going to see, we are somewhat already seeing it, but not massively. My personal will be is natural gas hopefully will be left behind. And so in the United States, by the way, yes, I think you have a problem in the chairs. In the United States, it was thought that natural gas had peaked, traditional gas had peaked in the United States 20 years ago. And we had built LNG facilities for importing LNG. Several of our liquid natural gas facilities were, I think, in the ballpark of $10 billion of investment to change them from import to export facilities. I think that they are going to end up being, hopefully not sacred cows, but stranded assets that aren't financially viable. Any thoughts, questions? Hopefully there's not any of you who has your entire retirement. Oh no, in Spain it works differently. It doesn't have all your investments in the LNG facilities, either personally or your firm. Any thoughts, questions, requests?
Nothing else? Let's see. If there is nothing else, we are gonna close down then today's session. It's 20 to 11 here, so it's time to go to dinner or sleep or whatever. Thank you very much, Adam, for your time and your comments. Now everybody will have your contact, so be ready to receive invitations to come to Barcelona to do whatever cooperations.
So
wait a minute, new question, Stefano.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's
All
a great question. So first of all, I think that I'm one of the ones, I am sure at least several people on this call are aware of a project that was called Eurotrek, was the concept of connecting from Iceland to Saudi Arabia, from Norway to North Africa with a high voltage direct current grid to be able to move power around this very large, and to be balancing out renewables and storage, and to be using Europe for massive amounts of storage. First of all, we do have problems with this transition. So one of the things, if we think about natural gas, the existing in the United States, and I don't know fully about Europe, is we have pretty much enough existing natural gas generation facilities that we can just be using those to fill in the gaps at horrendous periods as we go through a transition for 20 to 30 years with, in essence, every day less natural gas being used. It is a serious problem in the governance of electrical grids and making sure there's connectivity. There are lots of ideas of how much storage can you have, how much interconnections. And one of the real challenges is when the British decided to Brexit, they decided to break it, which is they're breaking a lot of their relationships and rules and otherwise, including for this sort of intermittency, of how do you deal and balance intermittency across a lot of arenas. So also, if we take about there's some really interesting things about geothermal that are potentially going to drive down the cost and increase the availability of geothermal as a baseload resource, but it's a challenge. So I think I believe the sort of challenge of what you're pointing to is the UK of megawatts at 300 euros. Okay, fine. In the United States, we've had circumstances where they go to 3,000 in the middle of summer with air conditioning. So the price signal, if used right, can drive things. Maybe if we had a good system with smart things and somebody learned, aha, if I turn off my television, they're going to start paying me. Maybe we have direct demand response in a much more sophisticated manner, smart gridding and otherwise. So it's a challenge, but I think it's a surmountable challenges. Ooh, Jean, send me that question because I am not, I think, are you actually talking about the electricity modeling and who are modeling? There's been some really cool stuff in that, but I'm not a modeler. Every so often I pay attention to those things, but I'm not, I have modeled, but my models are Excel spreadsheets. They're not sophisticated and serious. And I've not, so if you're asking about how to model and do the distributions, that's something I can try to connect you to some people. I'm not quite sure about how so there's a question about the Europe Green Deal and energy actions. I would suggest that there's the old joke about the United Kingdom and the United States of, that we speak one language and that poorly is sort of true about how Americans view the world, as well as, to be honest, I'll put is so many people, we have been such a disaster in the United States and Donald Trump that the domestic, I am somebody, I've worked in NATO, I have a French wife, I've written papers in French and been engaged and given, my focus is 99% the United States because we are such a problem. I think that there's not, what lessons we can learn from what Europe's doing. Can't we do as well as Europe? You might get from climate activists and energy people, but we've not had the energy to be thinking past our own borders. Often I would say that was very lousy, horrible American being American centric, but we have we are causing such serious problems for ourselves and others because of how poorly we're running ourselves, that I think that in many ways, but let's do it different is, in the Democratic Party, there's 100% support for rejoining the World Health Organization and being a part of how do we be a team player and work with others to address coronavirus and other pandemics and infectious disease. There is 100% or 99% support for rejoining the Paris Accords and being, part of the international discussion. There's a belief to be a leader of it, but I think that's poorly done. So I think that as we try to unbreak ourselves, that engagement will occur. And the real experts in international policy, but that's again, like John Kerry is someone who knows international relations, and the people being assigned to the State Department and our ambassador to the United, Donald Trump appointed a governor with no foreign experience and barely any foreign trips to be our ambassador to UN. The ambassador that Joe Biden has appointed, it was a 35-year career State Department ambassador with, really high skills. We're going to be re-engaging with the world in a very different way. So now I'm keeping people from the evening.
More questions?
So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Adam. I think we won't abuse. We have a lot of clappings from everybody. Thanks from a lot of people, and I am sure that everybody believes the same. Thanks for giving us your mail, which is right here if anybody wants. But I have the contact of Adam also, so if anybody needs to contact him for any reason in the near future, just contact me and you'll have the information. I will send you the post with the several charts that Adam sent to you. I saw some people taking pictures of the chart, so don't use.
I have a few more charts, so I will give me a day or two, and I'll send you perhaps 5 to 6 slides.
Okay.
And then we can give them to everyone.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, then I'll send it. I'll send this information to everybody. So thanks again.
And by the way, I apologize. I've not been looking at my own image as it got darker here in the United States since I had no light on. Sorry for darkening here.
I bé, si ja algú que us he dit abans, el dia 16 de desembre tindrem el representant de l'ITER per parlar de fusió, precisament, que és un dels temes que deia el Adam, que als Estats Units pot tenir suport bipartisan. No? Molt bé, bona nit, good evening, and well, see you sometimes in the future, Adam, and ens veurem d'aquí uns dies amb els que vulgueu. Adéu, adéu-siau.
Bye, thanks.
Adéu.
Gràcies.
Mm-hmm.